This is Karen with newclevelandradio.net for the Intentionality Gurus. And our subject today is very apropos because we are recording this on Sunday, March 12th, 2023. And even if you weren't aware, if you have anything electronically that changes time because of the internet, we just lost an hour. And I like it this way because it'll be light later. But the title of today is, Are You Overcommitted? And I think I really am today, Candas, because it was 10 minutes ago when I remembered, we have a podcast today.
It's good that one of us remembered, right?
Yeah, well, obviously you did because you logged in on time. So,
Yes.
But it's strange. I never thought of, the difference. I hear it all the time, when we spring forward, we're overly exhausted. We have to be careful. When we fall back, we don't take advantage of that extra time. It's like, as we've been talking about, don't we only have so many hours in a week anyways? Yeah.
Everybody has the exact same number of hours,
Right.
168 hours. And it seems so luxurious, 168 hours. But when you realize, some of it has to be allocated to sleep just for the body to continue to operate at optimum level. There's the eating part, there's the self-care, showering and doing whatever, maybe working out. Then there's family commitments, whether we live alone or we have people that reside in the same household. There's still commitments. I have sisters in California and so on. So anyway, you have more commitments than I in many regards because Rich is with you and your son was with the same household until relatively recently. So when we look at 168 hours, the rest of it has to be divvied up. It's kind of like the variable versus the standing commitments, financial budget, non-variable. And so just paying attention to that is noticing that part is very much a big part of it.
Exactly.
So what occurs to you when I say that again?
Well, it's interesting because we've talked about it before. I keep a calendar, not only for my business appointments, but, personal appointments as well. And lately I've been putting in there, time for reading, which, many years ago, it was like, oh, I'm just going to pick up the book and read. But being so attached to a computer, I don't stop and think about the reading commitments I've made to myself. But I go back and look at the calendar and I've got a lot of gaps in all my days. And yet I feel like I'm nonstop. I feel like I am in that hamster wheel.
Yeah, exactly. And, it's never ending in many respects. So some of the things we can notice are just, what you're saying, you have a calendar and you have things allocated and so on, but which ones are deep work and which ones are shallow work? And those are terms that Cal Newport uses in his book, Deep Work. And he says that we often tend to fill our days with the shallow work types of tasks because in the moment they feel satisfying, but they're not really moving us forward in any meaningful way in terms of the things that are really important to us. Like, answering all your emails or, I don't know, in your work, what might that look like?
Well, a lot of times it's cleaning out all the junk mail in my email. And I have two email systems that I work from. I have my personal and I have the business. And the business one I've kept fairly well clean. The personal one has a lot of duplicates from the business. And depending on when I'm cleaning it out, if I'm very mindful, I know that, all these business ones I can clean out because they're duplicates. But if I'm not, then I'm going through and at least glancing at them to see what they are. And each glance, takes up a chunk of time.
Yeah, we underestimate that. And it also can hijack our brain so that we're not actually working on the task, but it's kind of preoccupying our thing. I'm not
Right.
really good at having a late in the day. Let's see. I'm better at working on things earlier in the day than rather than having them kind of hovering over my head or occupying part of my attention. So a deadline at the end of the day doesn't spur me on. It actually, is undermining the work I'm doing in the moment. So I like
Exactly.
my deep work, the things that are going to meaningfully, that are associated with things that are the most important to me, my priorities, first thing in the morning. Otherwise, I think I've used the analogy before that you can start out the day seeing a lake that's smooth, placid and so on. And then a boat goes by and kicks up some waves, and then a breeze catches the wave. And then before you know it, and other boats come by, it's really choppy. Well, that's kind of the analogy sometimes through my days that um, I don't have control over the whole thing.
Right.
And I have to give up that illusion that I might, but I can put some guardrails on it. And if I don't put the guardrails on it, I'm just chopping around in one of those little boats on a big lake. So I don't know if you can relate to any of that.
Well, on the days that I'm working totally independent, what I mean by that, my husband is off to work. I don't have anything on my calendar that I need to do for him. I can be more focused on what I'm doing. However, when he's at home, whether he's working or not, anything that he needs to do, he's one of those people that thinks about it all day long. And then at night, when I'm shutting down, he's like a tornado getting everything completed. And that takes a lot out of me. And I haven't learned how to separate myself from that.
So it sounds like you guys have competing, what's the phrase, your time of day when
Oh,
you're.
yeah. Yeah. He is. And it's not so much he's a night owl, but when he knows he only has so much time to finish or do something, he can do it better than when he's somewhat relaxed to go take care of that, because then he would get lost in something else. Whereas I think I'm a little bit more like you that, I don't want it hanging over my head all day. So let's just get these things done. Then I don't have to really think about them because, they're in the outbasket.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and the other part of it is your husband's approach is a classic example of Parkinson's Law, that the time it takes to do something will expand the time available. And so if he feels like he's running out of bandwidth at the end of the day, time bandwidth, then he'll get them done. But that sense of urgency isn't there. And not everybody, there's no right or wrong about it. It's just what works for you.
Exactly.
Different approaches can take different tolls on us, depending on what's going on between our ears. So some of the things I loved when I was exploring this further, and this is stuff I'm working on. So when I say we're the intentionality gurus, I mean all of us through our own guru, we can be exploring these things and figuring it out for ourselves. I'm not the guru by any stretch, but basically some main categories of whys behind the overcommitting, right? So, and we've talked about many of these before. So not knowing how to say no, or how to delay saying yes until you can kind of scope out whether you have the bandwidth for the commitment. That concept never even occurred to me. Like, somebody asked me to do something, if I can do it, I'll do it. I'm one of those people that will start, jump in with problem solving, whether it's my problem or not. And
Right.
that's occupational hazard, but part of it is I was always that way. Some of it can be tied to pleaser tendencies. They don't have to be, pathological tendencies, but just the habitual way of saying yes remains on the tip of our tongue or brain, so that we tend to jump in with a yes prior to saying, wait a minute, this seems so easy in the moment, but what is it going to actually require? So I don't think you do any of that, do you?
Oh, not at all. I only did it maybe half a dozen times last week. So
Like 23 out of 24 hours a day or
Yep.
something like that. Okay. And then we underestimate the amount of times things are going to take. I mean, that for me, every time I delegate to someone else, and then later I have to end up doing the task, not necessarily the same task, but a similar task, I realize, oh, gee, how did I ever expect that person to get it done in 15 minutes when it takes,
Right.
45? Maybe it's because I don't do it all the time, but nonetheless, it was still an underestimation of how much time it takes.
Sure.
And then in this great article in Science Daily, it was from some research reported by the American Psychological Society. They call it underestimating basically overestimating the future time we're going to have. When we forget, wait a minute, a lot of that bandwidth is already consumed with these other prior yeses. All right, but we're thinking, oh, I have time next week, not paying attention to, wait a minute, that time has already been spoken for.
Right.
So any of that for you?
Well, again, this goes back to since we become empty nesters in our family, my husband has been taking on jobs that are out of town, sometimes, a 3-4 hour drive each way. And sometimes they're in areas that I'd like to go. And so he'll say, do you want to join me? And my first reaction is yes. And I go and I look at my calendar. Now I've got to move people around. But because I'm moving them around, I reach out to them and say, what is a good day for you? And there's my yes, because I'm going to do what they want. And then I realize that, yes, I'm going to be off for 2 days, but I've just filled up a day at the end of the week with like 4 times the amount of work that I normally would do in a week.
Yes.
And that's where I'm having the problem saying either no to him or just saying, I've just got to move this. I mean, the work that I'm doing, I don't have a true deadline, and neither do my, guests. So I've got to learn to take that step back and say, okay, no, this may be an inconvenience for you. However, and then I have to start providing them with times rather than letting them dictate to me.
Yeah, and that's really important. And there's nothing selfish or, whatever, brain crash is going on in our heads about it. It's really very, very hard for me to say no to people if I can make it possible. And I remember a client years and years ago who was upset because something wasn't moving through this agency fast enough, as if I had control over that. I used to be an expediter on those cases before I went to law school. And he was very tall. He happened to be in the reception room. And he's towering over me. And he was anxious, right? But about it. And I could totally relate to that. But I finally snapped. I have a very long fuse, but I finally snapped and I said, do you think I'm withholding that from you? Do you think I don't want that for you? Because, it causes me a lot of agita and so on. I said, you think I have a magic wand that I can just bink you on the head and give you your wish? If I did, I would bink myself on the head and send myself to, Fiji or something.
Yeah.
but the point of the story is I had to put limits on the expectation that I could, do all and be all. I truly wish I could be those things, but I have to set that expectation internally for myself.
Right.
And part of it starts with time, because everything is time bound. Quite frankly, we sleep within time limits and, everything else.
And also, I think for people like you and I who tend to say yes all the time, we have to take a step back. And when we're, going to say yes to somebody, I now have to think, would they jump for me? Would they make a change for me? Because, too many times, even though I'm saying yes, now I'm falling into a bad category of just doing what everybody else wants. And when that happens, I'm not at my best.
Yeah, you're carrying on demand in many ways, especially at the last minute, but just other people's dictates.
Exactly.
Yeah. And it doesn't meet those higher wheel of life type of things, areas of life that are important to us.
Exactly.
Part of the whys again are underestimating the future time that's going to be required, and then no time. I mean, this doesn't enter as much training as I've had and so on. This is not a skill that I have yet made automatic. It's getting there, but it's requires a lot of manual overriding in my brain to say, all right, Candy, pause before you say yes. And so we're not necessarily weighing the time demands. So Laura Vanderkam, the person who wrote the 168 hours, which a lot of what we are talking about is related. And Winning the Week by the authors Demir and Carrie Bentley and other people, Deep Work by Cal Newport. They're all talking about time budgets, in essence, that there's a limit on it, and to allocate it just like we would a financial budget. But that doesn't quite speak to me like on a visceral level. But when I think of it in terms of time bandwidth, it's kind of like the spectrum of colors. I see that there's a finite, bandwidth. There's bandwidth, just like our internet,
right?
All sorts of other things. And then when I'm saying yes to something, I'm paying a little, like, even if it's a nanosecond amount of attention to, what other commitment do I have to sacrifice, in essence, in order to say yes to this? And that's just made it a boatload easier for me. It's again, not hardwired in me yet. But if I really pay attention, and I've done these other exercises and so on, I'm in a better position to do that.
Well, and I think so many of us, when we understand what is, best for us, whether we've read the books or we've taken a class or we, just automatically understand it. I think, at least for me, my problem always has been, what is that person going to think about me? And I've realized that as important as it might be in some scenarios, is not the question you need to ask yourself every single time. But that's what I've done. If I made a commitment to somebody who I don't know, it's a really could have been a flexible commitment. And I start thinking, what are they going to think of me? Well, maybe they won't want to reschedule. Okay, what do I lose out of that? I can't have everybody, always happy with me. But it's taken me a long time to understand that.
Just noticing it is such an important milestone.
Right.
And since you've started to notice that, I presumably more and more, what has occurred for you?
So what I'm finding is that I would say more than 50% are, oh, no problem, it's okay. And the other 50% either don't acknowledge it, or maybe get frustrated with me for a short period of time, and then they forget it. And then when they go to reschedule with me, I still remember in the back of my head, and I have to say, take a deep breath, that, they're rescheduling. It's okay.
Right, exactly. So what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Well, one of the things that's really obvious about our time commitments, our overcommitting yeses, is that as not a rule, but as a tendency, our personal commitments to ourselves, for our health and for time for rejuvenation and recharging, or time to family, and not in that order necessarily, often gets the brunt of the adjustment. And I used to talk about robbing Peter to pay Paul time-wise with my day work. And my husband, when he was alive, would say, kiddingly, but behind humor is truth, he would say, you're not robbing Peter to pay Paul time-wise, you're robbing me to pay Paul time-wise. And I thought, it would just like daggers to my heart, because he was right, that when I needed a little extra, give in my schedule, it tended to come from my personal time, and most of that, I wanted to spend with him. So where might that show up for you?
It shows up for me like a lot. So I'm an early riser, and my day gets started even before my husband knows that it's time to wake up in the morning. But when he does get up, I may be in the middle of something that I really, really want to finish. And I'm trying more and more to understand his needs and how his needs complement me at times. So like, instead of saying, I can't talk to you right now, like leave me alone, so I can finish this, I'm slowly making choices of, okay, let me just make sure that this is saved, and then pick myself up and go talk to him, spend the time with him, because I realize that as important as the work may be to me at that time, the reality of it is, um, I want to be with him and I want to spend time with him. Although at the same time, I know when I need to say, hey, I need this time to myself. So it can be difficult. And I will say for years, I would put him off and just say, no, I got to finish this. And 3 hours later, when I, had everything done, he had already left for work. Like, I'm the one who missed out.
Yeah, exactly. And that takes a toll in time,
Right.
ourselves as well as the other person. So some of the actions we can take to remedy these things is just one notice, like we always talk about. When you pay attention, then you start to notice little forks in the road, which represent choices that we can make. And we're not bound to make that choice, a different choice. We can continue to go the path we've always gone, but that's the point. It's an intentional way of making a decision. And then some actions that can be trial and error. So, and I know this just is going to land like a lead balloon, but we can time track. And I don't mean in a rigorous way. I can't do, I know I can do it. I have done it. It's not something I enjoy, but I did it more recently again, because I had been reading the Winning the Week book by the Bentleys. And I've heard Demir Bentley speak, and he's just this great speaker on this topic. He's totally passionate about this topic, but he's talking about just tracking our days, and not in a rigorous way, like at 5:05.30 seconds that we did such and such, but just in general categories, and then label those bigger categories, kind of a la the wheel of life. What big areas of life that are important: our health, our family, our other relationships, maybe our financial security and work, and personal development, those kinds of things. And then apply it with Covey's rocks, pebbles, sand, and water. You remember that one?
Absolutely. Yep.
And put in the important things first, which will probably be family. I mean, when we come down to it, maybe not for everybody, and that's their choice, could be work. And then see what is deep work and what's shallow work. So shallow work is something that may be satisfying at the moment, but it's not necessarily contributing to the overall benefit of whether we're talking about the work world, part of our wheel of life, or our personal life, and so on. And then deep work is something that is advancing something that's more important to us, maybe on a more permanent or legacy level. And then this part was from the Winning the Week, having some sense of what the done criteria is. What occurs to you when I say that?
So, for instance, I was working on websites the other day, and when I complete them, it's like, does it really look any different? What did I really accomplish by doing this? And I'll ask myself those questions even before I get started. Okay. If I do this to my website, how important is it? And if it's important to me because I think something doesn't look right, well, that's if I accomplish it, hey, that was worth it. But if I'm looking at it and saying, oh, well, maybe I should just do this, freshen it up for those who are coming to the website, but not based on anything, that's pretty shallow.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, so just, maybe paying a little attention ahead of time that this is going to be good enough, the Goldilocks story, just right, too hard to
Yep.
just right kind of criteria. And then letting yourself stop when it's right. Doesn't mean perfection. Just right doesn't mean perfection. Just right may be an approximation.
Yep.
Right. So, and then here's one that really kind of, I did one of those little, forehead smacking moments of duh. Um, Instead of saying yes, training myself to say, let me get back to you to be sure this is something I can say yes to. You're not saying no. And then even then you can come back and say, I can't work that in now, but it's something I can consider, a month from now or, later in the year or something. And you'd be surprised how many people will have openness to letting it happen later. We're assuming their request now is something they want to act on immediately. I'm notorious for I get an idea and I need to hop on it.
Yeah.
But I need to pay attention actually to maybe not now, where does it fit into my time budget? So I might be inclined to call somebody, kind of throw my hat over the fence and say, hey, what do you think about such and such? And they take me up on it. Well, now I'm committed.
Right.
All right. And then the other thing I really love about this Demir Bentley is he must have come out of the womb kind of like, I'm here.
Yeah.
Really excited. He's got this really wild hair, curly hair, and so on, but he's just so enthusiastic about things. But he was describing a someday list. And I have what I used to call a capture list, ideas I didn't want to forget. And I would just kind of dump them, and there was a brain dump. And so he says anything you're not going to do within let's say, I guess 6 months or a year, you put on that list. All right, but it has to be a real viable contender for time in the time budget, so to speak. And one of the examples he gave more recently was that he speaks Italian. He taught himself to speak Italian, I guess fluently, but he often lives or spends a lot of time in South American countries. But he hasn't, in 8 years, he hasn't learned Spanish, and he says people mock him because his Spanish is so bad considering how long he's been in that culture. And so on his list of things to do, learn Spanish, become fluent in Spanish, but he never allocates time because he always sees other things. So what he does is he created this someday list, and knowing that that's where most things go to die, but he's not willing to see them die.
Okay.
And to kill them off. And then at the end of every month, he has a recurring task that says review someday list. And then this is the part that I found so adorable, but also so impactful for me, because he said each month he sees that become fluent in Spanish. And he's looking at his calendar, and he's looking at the someday list, and his calendar representing his commitments. And he'll say to himself, okay, become fluent in Spanish. You gotta earn your right to be on my calendar. Like, give me a sign to say that now's the time. So what do you think about that?
I think all of us have, well, I know I have a list like this, although it's floating in, the air somewhere, but it's almost like, this is something I really want to do.
Yeah.
But, I don't have time today, or I got to think it through better. In fact,
for my energy, I just don't have the bandwidth for that.
I have this potential client who I adore. Sadly, she doesn't have as much confidence in herself. However, she'll call me every couple months because she really wants to start a podcast. She'll basically outline it to me on the phone. And it's like, wow, and she has people that are lined up to work with her. Okay. But then she gets so involved in thinking about it. She'll call me and she'll say, I have to put this on the back burner right now. Now is not the time.
Uh-huh.
And this has been going on probably a little over 2 years. And I get really excited when she calls and say, hey, she's ready. But in the back of my mind, I know that she really isn't. Because I think I'll know the day when she calls up and says, without a lot of enthusiasm, can we get this going? But every time she now calls me, it's with all this excitement and enthusiasm. And I think that's what a lot of us do about projects, that this is so great. But as soon as you say, hey, I agree with you, it's like, oh, now I got to prove it's great.
Right. Yeah. And it puts the pedal, what is it? Yeah. The pedal to the metal. Yeah.
Yep.
And the metal to the pedal. But that it puts the pedal to the metal in terms of, it's an idea that's enticing and all those other things, but in application, actual doing of it, is it going to pan out? Do we have ingredients together that are going to make it fully form? So in the conversation today, what might stand out for you as something you want to remember for yourself, or something that you think listeners might want to remember?
Well, one of the things is, and I think I've said this before, personally, I have to get better at saying, let me think about it, rather than saying yes or no. Because I do find that sometimes when I say no, I feel regret. So, take the time, think about it, whatever it is. The other thing is that I've been putting on my calendar things like personal time. And I want to get to the point where I don't do that anymore, that I just make the time, that I can look at the calendar and say, oh, I don't have anybody for another 4 hours. Okay. And then just take the personal time. But when I plan it, it almost seems too rigid for me.
Okay. So but do you have guardrails on the end of the day, the beginning of the day, of when you go from personal to other?
I do, not every day of the week, but I would say 4 out of 7, I absolutely do. But 3 out of 7, I don't know, something, tends to draw me back into the office to do something, or to get on the phone and have a conversation with something about business. So I'm pretty good at it.
But the idea of scheduling personal time seems like you're being held to some rigid schedule.
Right. And especially, I'll give it an example. So let's say tomorrow I have somebody very early in the morning and then nobody until noon. And knowing my husband doesn't have to work until late in the day, if I put in personal time, but meaning spending time with him, but he's not available, or he just,
I see. Yeah.
or his personal time is, oh, sit and watch TV with me. That to me is not personal time. It's like, and that's where I'm finding, for me, it's become more of a work chore. And so I don't want to put it, I want to get to the point where I'm not putting it on my calendar anymore.
Yeah. All right. But it'll happen organically because
right.
You
exactly.
yourself. Great.
Yep.
Great. Alrighty. So, but how important that personal time is for rejuvenation, if nothing else.
Absolutely. And I have to tell our listening audience that even though I miss my weekend job, I am enjoying having more flexible time on the weekends. And I'm filling it up with a lot of self-care.
Okay.
And I realize that, I used to think that my work included self-care, and it made to a point, but not like it has the last couple of weeks, just like, oh, I can go read this now, or, um, you know, the vacuuming I didn't do during the week, and I love to vacuum. I know people probably think I'm crazy, but I love the hum of the vacuum and the movement. And so sometimes that's just relaxing for me
It can
to
be
go
like a form
vacuum.
of meditation in a way,
Yep.
focused on it. Oh, cool. Yeah, you'll be
Yeah.
reacquainted with what it's like not to work that many extra hours,
Right.
Kudos, kudos.
All right. Well, we'll do this again in a couple of weeks, and hope everybody has a great day. And if you're listening to this today, which is part of the time change syndrome we go through, today would be a really good day to do some self care. So think about it. And that's what I'm going to go do right now. Have a great day.
You too, Karen. Thank you. Bye-bye.